And welcome everybody to episode number 32 of RippleLIVE.
Mhm.
Steve, how you doing?
I'm doing really
Great to
great,
see you.
Mark. Yeah, it's been a while since we've
Excellent.
done one of these. I'm super excited for our
Yep.
show here.
And thank you everybody for joining. Looks like we've got folks from South Africa, Romania, Rome, Italy, Brazil, Holland, New York City, London, Wildemar, California, and the Netherlands, Brazil, New Mexico. Welcome everybody, and we're super psyched to have you. I think we're gonna have some fun today. We got some questions people have already provided, and we're gonna take any questions you post here. Steve's gonna give a little rundown on the process and a couple things that we got going on. I do want to mention, by the way, we're using Ecamm to do this broadcast. We switched over to Ecamm probably last year after using OBS, and we're super thrilled with it. It's just been a great thing, and it's just the two of us doing the whole thing right here. So Steve in particular is like the technical director today, so he's going to be the busy one.
Yeah, we used to use OBS, and it was a big deal. I used to have like a separate person to do it. It was kind of complicated, but I can't recommend Ecamm enough, especially if you're a Mac user. It's just so user friendly. You could do so much cool stuff with it. Anyway, I just wanted to wish everybody a warm welcome to our live stream. We're super happy you're here, and we don't take you for granted. We really appreciate your support, whether it's a tutorial or a plugin or just watching our videos and giving us a like or a thumbs up or a sub. Mark and I just really appreciate it. So we're glad you're here. We're looking forward to spending the next hour or so, hour and 15, whatever, answering your questions, showing you some cool stuff, and basically moving forward the whole Final Cut Pro ecosystem. Of Mark and I really love Final Cut Pro. It should be obvious from our channel that we think it's a great app. So if you're new to our live stream, a couple of things. One is we take questions ahead of time. We send out an email usually, and we get kind of pre-selected questions that we go through. But it's also a live show when you could post your questions here and we'll answer them. If you want to do a super chat, we really appreciate it. It helps us support the show. If you do a super chat, it'll take your question and put it right to the top of the queue, and we'll answer them. And if you put in your question, we'll do our best to answer them. It's always hard to predict, how much time we get and how complicated the questions are. If we miss your question, it wasn't intentional. Just post it again so we see it. I have a feature here on Ecamm that allows me to favorite a question. So if I miss it, I can go to the favorite sections and look at it. So, just post it again if we missed it. Anyway, did I leave anything out, Mark?
Super chat, and I guess just no. I think that's it for how the thing runs. Just post your questions, and we'll do our best we can to get to them. We'll text some stuff back. We'll post links in the chat if we have specific things we want to point you to.
Yeah.
So let's just rock and roll. I know you've got a couple of announcements, Steve.
Yeah, a couple of things. I want to show you one thing that I hope you can see this. It's here. There we go. There we go. How's that? So one thing I want to, if you're a Final Cut Pro user, and I can't stress this event enough. It's called the Final Cut Pro Creative Summit, and it's held in Cupertino, November 6th through the 8th. That's where Final Cut users from all over the world will meet in Cupertino. And Apple does a whole demo for us. We get to hang out. We do classes. It's just a tremendous event where we can all get together. And this is the first time that I think they've done a live event where we're all together in one room. They did it last year, but it was all over the world. And frankly, it just didn't work. I think it was better with one event. And if you can make it on those dates, Mark and I will be there, and it'll be a lot of fun. So you can sign up for that, dates and locations. It's in Cupertino, home of Apple, and you would definitely want to check that out. The other thing, and just a quick plug, pardon the pun, we're still running our 72-hour flash sale on our plugins. Every single plugin that Mark and I have created called RT Plugins on sale for $10. Each one is normally $29, so $10 per plugin, or you can buy the entire bundle. Here you can see it's like you can buy all 9 for $79, which is like 70% off. So Mark, the thing about these plugins, let me just say, we created them for us. So we didn't just create some random plugin. These are plugins we use every day for our tutorials, for our YouTube videos, what have you. So like, for example, like shortcuts that, we put, keyboard shortcuts on the screen when we're showing shortcuts. We created that because of what we do. So again, every one of these was based out of, necessity, really. So, and they're, again, great deal, $10 each. And so want to avail yourself to that. All right. So where are you going, Mark?
Sorry, I'm right back. Somebody was complaining about my backlight, so I was fixing that. Okay, great. So what we want to do here is jump into our questions, and we're going to start with a couple questions that we had submitted to us. And we're really just going through these in the order they were submitted in. And the very first question we have here is, what is the best way to reuse clips from previous projects? For example, when editing a reel, it seems tricky to use old footage in new libraries efficiently, especially when wanting to preserve color grades and effects. That's a great question. And a couple of recommendations I have for that. And Steve, if you could share my screen, I'll show you what I have going on here. And the first thing here, this application is called Final Cut Library Manager. And if some of you guys know about it and use it, post it in the chat there. I don't know anybody who's used it who hasn't loved it, because what it does, it allows you to track all of your libraries, all of the content in all your libraries across all of your drives, including drives that aren't connected. Once they're scanned, it basically builds this database of all your Final Cut libraries and all the content in them. So I've had to do the same thing that the person was asking the question about, where, okay, I need to do something new and I need to pull content from a bunch of different libraries. Like, how do I go about that? So one thing I do is I use Final Cut Pro Library to search through and identify where content is I want. And you can see, you can look at specific connected drives. If I select them, everything blue is on that particular drive. So I have this Thunder Bay RAID or my local drive, but it can also search through disconnected drive. So at one point I had scanned this T7 drive and I can see all the content there. And not only can you see see the names of the libraries, you can open those libraries up and see the names of the events inside them, and you can search. And you can even search on the media names and the keywords. So for instance, if I were to search on the word drone here, it does take a second. Sometimes it's a little bit slow is the only thing I would say, because it's searching across all this stuff. You can see that it found drone in a couple different places here. And I can go through and locate all those drone shots. So that's the first thing, is when you're trying to select a lot of footage or locate footage across multiple libraries and multiple drives, even disconnected drives, Final Cut Pro Library Manager is great. And by the way, another thing people use it for is to get rid of all your extra generated media, optimized, proxy, optical flow, render files. It will allow you to do that across all your libraries, across all your connected drives in one go. So it's a super efficient way to free up space as well. So I just wanted to give a shout out, because I love, and they're not a sponsor or anything. We bought their product. It's very inexpensive. Anyway, I really love it. So that's number one. The other thing I want to mention is I get it that if you want to bring in stuff that's been, you've color corrected and make a bunch of changes, and you want to bring those clips in, you can just copy those projects in or copy them to a project in another library. But the main thing I want to bring up is that if you're copying media into a new library from media and libraries that are on the same drive, you're actually not duplicating that media. And it's a little bit kind of hard to wrap your head around, but I just want to show you this because it's really worth understanding, because you can really save a lot of disk space by working this way. So for instance, here I have this Belize May library, and if I select it, you'll see that it's a big library. Over on the right, we can see it's 613 gigs. So it's like, I'm sorry, it's like, yeah, it's around 500 gigs, something like that. And then I have a new library called For Real. And this guy's only 345 kilobytes. It's empty. It's an empty library. They're both on the same drive. If I look in the library inspector, we can see that it's located, the library is on the Thunder Bay drive and my media is in the library. The same for this Belize library, the big one, the storage location is in the library and it's located on the Thunder Bay. So they're both on the same RAID. They're both on the same drive. So for instance, if I go and I select a bunch of clips and I copy those over to this other reel, I'll get over this other library, I'll get a pop-up menu, and I do want to copy the media. If I do clips without the media, then those clips will appear offline. I don't want that. I want to copy the media. Now, here's what's crazy about this. I'm going to say okay, and boom, they're there, and we do see a little operation going, but that's really just creating the backup. Now, here's the thing. They're in this library. If I select this library, we can see the size is now 6.5 gigs. So it did copy them. They are now completely separate from that other library. If I were to take this 4-reel library and move it to another drive, it's totally self-contained. However, I didn't actually duplicate any media because Final Cut Pro uses this process called hard links, where it recognizes that media is the same and already exists on that hard drive. So it's not actually going to take up more space on the hard drive, even though if you look at the hard drive numbers, it looks like it is, but you're not taking up more space until you copy it to some new drive. So I just want to mention that because it's a great way to go through and build up all the clips you want by creating a library on the same drive where most of your media is. And once you get it all set up, you can delete the stuff you don't want, and you have a self-contained library. And then if you need to, you could move it to another library at that point. So that's it. That's a little demo on that thing.
That was great, Mark. It's so funny about, we're back on the screen. You know, it's
Yep.
really interesting to me about media managers. Always questions about media management in Final Cut. You know, like for example, I just got one coming in from Lakewood, Colorado, about suggested workflow for Silicon Max. You know, library and external versus internal drives. You know, it's always a perennial question. So like for us, all my media is always external because I have a server, a shared server over Ethernet. It's a shared server over Ethernet, and I want to, you know, have different libraries accessing the same media. I can't have media living in a library. I just find it easier to manage the libraries when the media is outside it, but that's just me. That's how I work.
I do the opposite. I do the opposite. All my media is always in the libraries because I never want stuff to be offline. So to me, it's okay that at the end of the day, if I'm on separate drives, I'm duplicating some media. But because I have everything on a big RAID, I know I'm not taking up more space by doing that. So for me, I constantly, because I'm pulling media from so many different sources, when I'm finished with a project, I always make sure I consolidate inside the library to the specific RAID that I'm working off of. Yeah. So it's clear that there is no single answer because we each do the opposite thing based on our own preferences and workflow.
Yeah. So I know I'm going a little bit backwards unless we're definitely reading your questions. So please put them in there. One question was David Price had asked about, he's kind of a newbie and he's a little confused about the whole hierarchical structure inside of Final Cut Pro. And the way I like to think about it, David, is that libraries is like a suitcase. So your library is a suitcase. And the library is what contains two things. It contains your media and your projects. Now, projects, it also means timelines. So timelines and projects in Final Cut Pro are synonymous. So just think of it this way. Timelines, media, inside a library. And you do have one additional issue called an event. An event is just what I call a super bin. It's just a place for storing different. It'd probably be best for me for just to show you really quick. Let's see here. Let's see. Can you see my screen?
Yes. I see Final Cut Library Manager.
Yeah, so we're in Final Cut. So I mean, you can see it here, but I have a library and then I have an event for a wedding right here. And inside the wedding, I have my project and I have my individual clips. Now that event, the nice thing about Final Cut is you can create multiple events. So I can go up here and I can say, create a new event and literally create a separate a separate receptacle, as it were, for holding different media and timelines. So I can, if I like working on a wedding, this would be a perfect example. I might put the wedding in one event and the ceremony in another event. But you don't have to work that way. That's just one way of working. So that's just the simple explanation of how you would work with libraries, events, projects, and media in Final Cut. A couple of other questions. Yeah, do you want to say something, Mark?
Yeah, just I'd recommend we have a tutorial on media management that is perfect for beginners, that explains exactly what Steve was talking about in detail and gives a lot of examples, and will help you really get grounded in how to set up your projects and how to deal with archiving your projects and whether to put media inside, outside the library, all of that stuff. So rippletraining.com, just look for the media management tutorial.
So a couple of quick questions. Pieces of Vinyl asked a question about have some issues, especially with callouts, some weird things happening. Just in general, if you're having issues with our tutorials or plugins, just email us at support@RippleTraining. We track everything. It goes into a thing. It goes into an area where Mark and I can both see it. So any issues that you're experiencing with any of our products, just use support@RippleTraining, and we'll get back to you. Can you save your music enhanced settings as a preset? Well, anything that you do to your audio as a preset, like compressors, you had a compressor, maybe a limiter, maybe an EQ, all that can be saved as a preset because Final Cut considers that an effect. So any effect, visual effect, audio effect, can all be saved as a preset that you can apply to things. Okay, Jeff Steinborn asks, will your motion tutorials be updated to reflect latest version? All our tutorials work, and you did mention earlier later in the comment that some of the menus may have changed slightly, and we do our best to try to keep all our tutorials updated. But one of the things that's challenging, and we're experiencing that because we do a lot of Resolve training, is like we do this huge training and then they'll make an update and they'll change a menu, and it's always challenging to go back and kind of figure out, is it going to mess people up? Because we're not going to record an entire tutorial, for a couple of UI changes. So, all I can say is, yes, all our motion training is completely relevant. And, if there is something that you notice, we'll address it. We'll try to address it. Okay, cool. So what I want to do is, let's see any other questions. Okay, so 30-day filmmaker loved our video on the MX Master Pro. By the way, yes, love this mouse. We both love this mouse because you have buttons you can control. By the way, you made us notice I ran out of power just before. I love how you can use the mouse with power plugged into it, unlike the Apple mouse where it's the port is on the bottom. You can't use the mouse while it's charging. But anyway, big fan of this mouse. Okay. Anyway, so Tony Elwood asks, when will Final Cut title area allow you to insert a paragraph of text without having to make line breaks and then having the text auto capitalize next line? Do you know what he's talking about, Mark?
I just answered him there. It really depends on how the title was designed. So those titles are designed in Motion. And when you design a title in Motion, you have the option of setting the text layout to be a paragraph layout or just a text layout. If it's a paragraph layout, you can lay everything in. So what I'm recommending is, you'd have to look at every title to see how it's laid out, but you can just make it in Final Cut, or you can modify. You can open the existing one up in Motion and change the layout to a paragraph.
So it's funny, K-Life brings the question, do you guys at Ripple have a Discord group? That's so funny. We just set up a Discord and we haven't announced it yet. We're still trying to figure out how much time that's going to involve, Mark and I, but Discord is absolutely cool. We like Facebook. We think having a private server is way better. Let us know in the comments if if a Discord server is something you'd be interested in. We just, let us know. I mean, that's a place we can hang out, share videos, do watch parties, what have you. So anyway, let us know in the comments if that's something you're interested in. Okay, so what I want to do, Mark, is I want to kind of switch over to some of the questions that were kind of pre-sent in. We could do that really quick. Let's see here. Let's see.
Yeah, I think yours is a demo.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so funny. I'm just So the question is, let's say RED camera workflow with the popularity of the Komodo. And now Komodo X, can you discuss the workflow that exists today? RED favors DaVinci and Premiere on their site. So I'm hopeful my two favorite FCP experts will discuss the topic and use it as a request. Well, let me just say categorically that RED has been supported in Final Cut Pro since version 10.4. It's been there a long time. The workflow is pretty straightforward. I have no idea. I can't speak to why RED's not promoting Final Cut. That's kind of weird to me because it's worked probably longer in RED than it has in DaVinci Resolve, honestly. So what I want to do is I'm going to switch over to my screen for a moment, and we'll go over to Final Cut, and I'm going to just show you that, well, before you even work with RED footage, it's important to know that you can't work without RED footage without installing a plugin. You have to go to red.com and install what's called the RED Workflow Installer. You have to do that. But essentially all RED footage works the same. Now, what I've done is I've got 4 clips that these came from the RED Komodo, and you can see I'm scrubbing. They're there in my browser, and I'm going to go ahead and just grab a couple of them and just drag them into the timeline here. Look, I can play them in real time. And again, this is all because of the plugin. I just have a plugin, I can play them. They play in real time. These are 6K RED Komodo files. So they're playing in Final Cut just fine. Let me turn off the angle viewer. But what's really great about the raw workflow in here is that you just go to the info inspector toward the bottom. You'll see a button that says, you'll see modify RED raw settings. If you click that, you'll get a window, and the window allows you to modify things like the ISO. So I can bring up the exposure or down the exposure, and I can play with the Kelvin. I can make it warm or cool. Basically, I'm modifying all the metadata in the file. So this is the RED Komodo file right in the Final Cut. And then when you're done messing with it, then you can actually you can transcode this into a. So for example, like maybe that's the look that I want. Maybe I want to apply that setting. So it's applied. And I can go to each shot and apply whatever RED raw metadata setting I want. And then when I'm done, I can then click this transcode media, and then it'll actually turn it into proxy media or optimize, whatever I prefer. And then if I want the best playback performance, or if I want, I can work with proxy. I can render that into H.264 at 50%, or same as source, which is the 6K, which I don't see why I would want to do that, but you could, but 50%, 25%, whatever, and click OK. And basically what will happen, it's going to render that RED file into a proxy or optimized media. So all that to say that, I went through that all that to say the RED workflow it's slick. It works really nice and works with, you just got to put in that installer and it just works. All right, so you've been, all right, so let's get back to some of the other questions really quick here. It's,
yeah, I've been answering a few just directly there. Right. There's some questions about, I'll just mention questions about are our plugins available for the iPad? And the answer is nobody's plugins are available for the iPad because Final Cut Pro for iPad does not currently support third-party plugins, although Apple has publicly stated that it will in a future release.
Yeah. Okay. So back to the kind of pre-submitted questions. I'm going to go through. If you see any questions that we need to answer right up, we'll go ahead and do that. All right. So there was a question about, you have both showed and learned us. You learned us a lot about Final Cut Pro. I was wondering if you would do the same for DaVinci Resolve. So, it's no secret that Mark and I both use Resolve, and there's a whole discussion about, we've talked about a lot of times why we still prefer using Final Cut for our editors. The magnetic timeline is just so fast. But we use Resolve. There's things that you can do in Resolve that you can't do in Final Cut. Mark's actually working on a tutorial on Fusion, like visual effects. Things that you literally can't do in motion. So that's why we cover this app because it's popular. So the question is, would it make sense to do something like what we're doing right now for Resolve? So you could let us know about that as well. So that was essentially the question.
Yeah,
Okay.
I thought they meant, would you do Resolve training, which we've got a bunch of Resolve training.
Yeah,
So we
we
could do
have.
that because
Yeah.
it's actually fascinating because we use both because there's strengths and weaknesses of both, and they
Yeah.
complement each other really well.
Yeah. There's a question. I shot a long burst of photos uh, that I want to bring into Final Cut Pro iPad. I dropped them in a timeline, but they have a duration of 4 seconds each. I cannot for the life of me figure out how to change the duration of all these photos. And so is that an easy one, Mark?
Well, it's not a nice one, but it is. There's not a way to do that currently. There's things on the iPad that you
Yeah.
can't do that you feel like you should be able to do, like separating audio and adding markers, and there's all kind of little things. There's all kind of things people would like to be able to do, including myself. But it's an amazing first version and super powerful, and I'm looking forward to it continuing to evolve.
Yep. Continue to evolve. So there was a question about keyframing. We'll get to that. Why doesn't Apple refine, fix, make better keyframing? Yeah. Yes, we really feel like the keyframing could be improved to be
Agreed.
yeah.
I think what we do is, I just go to Motion if I need to do have more control over keyframing or using behaviors, and publish that stuff to Final Cut so I can do it in Final Cut.
Yeah. All right. So the other question was about what keyer do you prefer? Do you like the Final Cut Pro keyer? Is there another one I should be using? And Mark, I personally, I like Final Cut Pro's built-in chromakeyer. I think it's a good keyer, but there are some people that really like, how do you pronounce it? The Haiku keyer?
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat here. I find the keyer built into Final Cut is great. Somebody else asked about green screen. We have a tutorial that will take you in depth. The Final Cut keyer is deep. It's very deep. There's a lot of components to it, and the basics. It can do a key in 2 seconds, but to really tweak it and clean it up, it's got a lot of control for that. But I mentioned this Hawaii key just because I've heard a lot of people rave about it. I've never needed it. I find I can key, and I'll have a little demo later, but it's getting less and less necessary to key because there's products like Keeper that will take your isolate your subject from the background without a green screen. And those are getting better with AI. That stuff's getting better and better all the time. So I think green screen eventually is going to be remember back in the day when they did green screen?
Exactly. So there is a question. I'm not going to read it all because it's a long paragraph, but there's concerns about upgrading from Final Cut Pro to 10.6.7. There were some issues with freezes and freezing in the viewer and crashes. And then Apple pretty much addressed that right away by coming out with Final Cut 10.6.8. And that seemed to address all the issues. Now, can we just talk for a minute about updates? Okay. Updates, first of all, I recommend turning off automatic updates, period, on your Mac. So you wake up in the morning, yes. Turn that off. Turn off automatic updates. The other thing that I highly recommend that you do is that you back up your current version of Final Cut in the applications folder simply by right-clicking on it and choosing compress. It'll make a zip file of it. Then take that zip, put it somewhere, put it on a drive, whatever. I cannot tell you how many times people have called me or texted me in a panic saying, how do I downgrade? How do I downgrade? Well, unless you're running Time Machine, you can't go back. I mean, Apple doesn't necessarily, I'm sure you could probably search the web and find it, in the dark web somewhere. It's just much easier to just zip it, put it off the side. If you need to downgrade, you can basically trash the Final Cut version that's messing you up and then reinstall from the old, and now you're good to go. I compress, before upgrading, I compress every single one of my Pro apps, Motion, Compressor, Final Cut. And I keep them for about, 6 months till I know there's no problems, and then I'll get rid of them.
The only comment I'd add to that, I totally agree. I do the same thing. I've got a folder of old versions of all 3 apps that I keep on the RAID. But before opening a library, that with the new version, because once you open a library and it needs to be updated, then you can't go back with that library either. So what I'd recommend is duplicating that library before opening it and open the copy. And you might say, well, wait, my library it's a terabyte. Okay, fine. Just move the media out of it. If you're moving the media out of it on the same drive, it will happen in 2 seconds. Okay, more than 2 seconds, but you're not copying it since you're just moving the media out on the same drive, then duplicate it, then test it out, just so that you're completely covered. Is the safest thing to do. Now, I don't always do that. I kind of dive in. I do always zip up the previous version, but sometimes I play it a little dangerous with just opening those libraries up and like, oh, it's going to be fine. I haven't had a problem with that yet.
Yeah, and then
I agree.
Brian.
Go ahead. Yeah.
No, Brian
I was gonna say,
bring a really good point, Brian. Never update your OS or Final Cut mid-project. That's huge.
But I'm always mid-project.
I'm always exactly. You know, and then Jaden says, look, I learned the hard way. You know, mid-project, and you're stuck, and oh man, it's just, you know, hell hath no fury like an Mac OS update. Sorry, it just yeah. So anyway, so yeah, I like what Jaden said earlier too about 10.6. Never forget. Never forget. Anyway, so hopefully you won't ever find yourself in a situation where you're like, oh my gosh, I can't work. Just back up your library. It's a really good idea.
Okay. Steve, could I do my
sure?
Little
You want to do it?
thing?
Absolutely. Do you want to see an AI demo? Yeah, I'm sure you guys do. So yeah, share your screen, Mark, and I'll bring it up.
Well, let me just read the question. So this addresses one of the submitted questions. Says, have you worked with Adobe's generative AI in regards to Final Cut Pro or motion workflows? I would love to get your take on what you would do with those tools. Love your work and please keep it up. Jeff in East PA, Eastern Pennsylvania.
Aren't you a Pennsylvania boy?
Pennsylvania.
Yeah,
I am. So the way I'm going to answer that might be a little bit odd, but I'm actually going to start in Pixelmator Pro because here's something that we used to do in a very painstaking way, and that is taking stills, taking photographs, and isolating elements in order to animate them separately in Final Cut Pro or in Motion. And it used to be a process of like hand drawing mats around things in order to get rid of them. And you don't have to do that anymore. And I'm in Pixelmator Pro instead of Photoshop because I love Photoshop. I use Photoshop. I pay for a basic subscription. But for a lot of people, it's more than they need. Pixelmator Pro is a one-time fee, and it's amazing. We have a whole tutorial on it. But I just want to show you, I want to separate this couple and the rock from here. And up here in the top right is a little tool called Remove Background. And if I just click on that, oh, actually, I'm going to undo that. Sorry. I'm going to duplicate this layer first. And then I'll turn the bottom one off, and you already saw it, but I'll click on that, and it just, boom. It takes one click and you're done. And you might say, well, wait a minute, Mark, you got to deal with those rocks. And I agree. So what I'll do is I'll duplicate that layer and turn it off. I'll also turn that off. So I just want to get rid of those rocks. So now I have this tool here selected, which is quick selection. And this thing lets you just go along here and look at this. Boop, 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 boop. Okay. I'll invert that, Shift Command I, delete. And now I've got those rocks. So now I have the people and the rocks. So I can select those and merge them down to a single layer. And then, but I still got this background. And what do I want to do with that? Well, I'll duplicate it again just to be on the safe side. So now I want to fill in, and this is where we used to have, create a hole. So what we would do before is like create a selection there, hit delete, and then have to clone in all this area, which is really painstaking and messy and hard to do well. I'm going to undo that and deselect it. Instead, what I'm going to do with the selected here, I'm just going to use this repair tool over here, click on it, and I'm going to drag a quick outline around these guys like this. Make sure to cover them. And I'll also cover this little foreground element like that. And release the mouse. And They're gone and it's filled in the background. Now, is it perfect? No. And you could go in and do some cleanup work, but honestly, we're just going to do a slight move. You're never going to notice this. So now, yes, you can do all that in Photoshop, but here's what you can't do in Photoshop. Under the File menu, I'm going to choose Export, and then I'm going to export a motion project. And I'll call this couple. Export the motion project. Go to the Finder. There's my couple. I will open them up in Motion. So here we are in Motion. I'll add a camera. And if I'll switch to 3D, and if I rotate, you'll see we have that flat thing, but we've got all our layers here. So if I select this background layer, hold the Command key down, I can drag to move it back in Z space. So now if I orbit the camera, you'll see they're separate in Z space, which means I can do a little dolly move and I get that nice separation of the foreground and background going on. So super easy to do now because of this, AI powered sort of selection tools that are in Pixelmator Pro and Photoshop. So you might say, well, that's great, but listen, I really want to zoom. There's not enough, content there. Look, I run out of content. Well, that's where Photoshop Beta comes in. So if I go to the Photoshop Beta, I have here the same exact picture that I've brought into Photoshop. And what I'm gonna do is just press Command minus to zoom out a little bit. Now this is the beta version of Photoshop that has generative expand and generative fill. So if I select the crop tool, I'm gonna hold down Shift and Option and expand this out. Now check this out. Expand that out. Don't worry about that. That little purple mark is because this pointer tool adds a mark when you hold the Option key down. But now I'm gonna use the generative expand by clicking the check box. And I could add elements to it, but I'm not gonna use a prompt. I'm just gonna hit generate. And it thinks about it. And you can generate to the left or the right or the top or generate much bigger than this. I'm just adding a little bit of content to show how this works. And look at that. It fills in the rest of the picture in this amazing way to create more background. So it's basically doing a set extension so I could do a bigger zoom in motion. So those are the couple tools that I use when talking about Final Cut Pro and motion workflows right now. And I'm experimenting, play with Midjourney, play with ChatGPT, but these are things that you can do now that really speed up your workflow, especially if you're doing anything with animating stills.
All right, cool, Mark. Thank you. So that was it's pretty amazing. All these AI tools that just saving so much time. That was a great demo, Mark. By the way, that was the first time I've seen the demo. It's like I'm just as surprised. Like that's pretty cool. It's really great.
Yeah, this is the worst it'll ever be.
the worst.
Yeah,
so
it's only going to get better from here.
So there were a couple of comments a while back. I'm just for you guys that are just joining the show. We're answering questions that were pre-submitted. We're also taking your live questions, and I'm doing my best to go through the comment section. And if I missed your question, please post it again. There were a couple earlier that I want to address now. One of them was, is there a way to apply a plugin in Final Cut on clips to apply a timecode burn with source timecode for exporting dailies and transcriptions? This is one thing Resolve does well. Absolutely. I won't show it to you, but there is a timecode generator plugin, and you can add it as I suggest adding it as an adjustment layer. So just put adjustment layer along the top, add the timecode effect, set your time, and export. And you have a timecode burn in. It's actually easier to do than Resolve, because Resolve you got to go to the media page and you got to turn on this thing, and it's not quite as clean, but yeah, you could totally do it in Final Cut. Mark, there's a question here for you, Mark. The faded eccentric. Thanks. So I'm using Motion Final Cut. Just recently bought a Wacom, and I read in the manual of Motion that paint strokes and building graphics is easier with a Wacom and offers more options. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah. It's true. I responded that you can definitely do more with a pen, like an Apple Pencil or whatever. And I'm not on the screen there. Where am I there? And a Wacom tablet. Honestly, I've done that. I haven't touched my Wacom in a long time. I just am able to work directly with the mouse and do most of what I need to do. But if you really like working with a pen and a Wacom tablet, to me, it's just not worth the desk space for it. But it works great. and you can do some cool things with motion with a pen and a Wacom tablet.
So Jeff Steinward says, Mark, don't forget to mention Photomator Pro. Photomator Pro? I never heard of Photomator Pro, Mark, have you? Although purchase.
I don't know. I don't know. That's new to me. So Jeffrey, thanks. I'll check that out.
Yeah. Okay, cool. All right, so let's go through our questions here. There was a question about, let's see here, multicam clips. The question basically reads, I record using several cameras. Some are 1080p, some are 4K. I multicam them all together in a 1080p multicam container, but they edit them in a 720p timeline. I often felt that while it seems to work, I may be doing something wrong with mixing all the resolutions so that when I edit and scale zoom on what was originally a 4K clip, I might not be getting a clean output. Well, we thought about that workflow, and you're doing everything just right. We wouldn't change anything. So the great thing about Final Cut's multicam is you can mix different frame sizes, in one multi-kit container. So you have a 4K and a 1080 in the same multi-kit container. What you need to decide is what your output project's going to be. It's always about what you're outputting. So if you're outputting a 1080, then you'll put your 4K multicam clip in the 1080 project. When you go into the angle editor, you can then scale that up to 200% without loss of resolution. And when it gets spit out as an angle at the other end of the pipeline, it'll look fine. It'll be exactly, there won't be any issue. So basically reaffirming your workflow. I think it's good. All right. So, yeah.
So just one more, there's been more chatter about discussion about the timecode generator. And there's timecode as a generator, there's timecode as a title. If you want, and you can use source or project timecode. Project timecode works as an adjustment layer, but it won't work on an adjustment layer if you want to do source timecode. You need to apply it, for the clips. We should do a demo of that later to show, because people get confused about that. You can also bring up display of source and timecode in a big window on top just to see it while you're working, but you can burn in source or project timecode on your clips.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, cool. So I want to remind everybody, if you have some questions, burning questions that you want to ask Mark or I, just put them in the comments section. We're doing our best to go through the list and trying to answer everything we can, and also answer the pre-submitted questions. And okay, so there was, and then maybe it's time to do another demo. So I haven't done a video on 360 video VR in a long time. Now, with the forthcoming Apple Vision Pro, I think this whole idea of working in a 360 space, AR space, is going to increase. I think, I don't have any information about how that's going to integrate Final Cut, but I just can't imagine Apple not using Final Cut Pro as this platform for authoring stuff for their Vision Pro. I just can't imagine them not doing it. It's just a perfect fit. Not to say that, the other companies won't do it, but just why wouldn't Apple just have this awesome editor built in? And they do. They actually have a really good 360 editor right now. And what I want to do is kind of walk you through some of those things, just to refamiliarize you. Maybe you are working at 360, maybe you aren't, but maybe this will be a kind of an introduction to how you work with 360 in Final Cut Pro. But the specific question, well, let me read the specific question, is I just edited my first 360 video sourced from Insta360 One. Is there a way to mix a standard clip, e.g. not 360 spherical, onto a 360 timeline such that is treated like the non-360 that it is, i.e. it stays in view, not panable? I'm think for like an opening and screen titles, that sort of thing. So I think that's an excellent question, and I really like doing VR stuff. So let me share my screen and go to Final Cut. All right, so I have a 360 time. Now, the first thing is you work in a 360, you work what's called equirectangular media. So it's basically, remember as you grew up, in school you had the world maps and it looked weird when it was spread out. It's basically a sphere that's like represented flat. So this is what they call an equirectangular image. And what we need to do is we need to map it to a sphere. And by the way, in Final Cut, you'll have all the clips that come in as equirectangular will have a little badge up in the corner. So that's the first thing. So we could put these into a timeline. I'm going to right click. I'm going to just say, actually, I'm going to use a different clip. I'm going to right click on this clip, new project, and Final Cut immediately recognizes this as a 360 monoscopic clip. By the way, my camera shoots in, what is it? It shoots in up to, I believe it's 6K, but you could shoot, so that's what it should be, 6K, 2997p. I'm just going to call this my vacation in 360, okay? And I'm going to just click OK, all right? So I now have this equirectangular clip here, and it doesn't do me any good here. Now, in Final Cut Pro, you can view, there's an actual 360 viewer. And what this allows you to do is pan around and look. That's actually really not a good clip. I got a better clip. Let's do this one instead. Let's do this one. So I have this clip. I can pan around. There I am. And I love the Insta360 because it has the invisible selfie stick. So it looks like I'm just standing there with I don't know. And just it removes the stick entirely. And I love that about shooting in 360. But remember, I've got access to the whole sphere. I'm looking at this whole 6K image is snapped to the sphere here. And so the thing is about 360, and Final Cut is still a little bit behind the times. And the reason I'm saying that is that under settings, do you guys remember something called Steam VR? Those of you who are gamers know about Steam. And this is really the only way to get VR content into like a headset, was going through, I can't even remember the name of the headset. Now I'm drawing a blank. But this doesn't even work anymore. Do you remember what the name of it was, Mark?
Oculus you're talking about?
No, it wasn't the Oculus. It was the Vive. Vive, yeah.
Well, the Vive, right?
Vive.
The Vive.
It was a Vive. So this doesn't even work anymore. So now this is what I mean about Apple needs to seriously like this is where I see Apple going like Vision, go to Vision Pro, and then you'll be able to look at your content directly, and that's what I see happening. And so here I have this 360 clip, but the question in particular is that can I add flat content to this? And you absolutely can. So I'm going to open this one timeline I already have kind of pre-built, and you can see here that this is a flat clip. This is a flat clip that it's inside the 360 sphere. And there it is. There it is. So when I've got the goggles on, I could literally have a projection of a flat image in front of me. And his particular question was, how can I make it so that's what they see? Well, that's where keyframing comes in. You just, you select the clip, and over in the 360 transforms, you can actually keyframe the latitude and longitude of where that flat image appears in 360 space. And if I go to view, and this is really handy, if I go to show horizon, I'll get this grid, this little grid that shows me pretty much the horizon. So when I'm manipulating this, I could see where that image is in relationship to the sphere, like whether it's on the bottom. Now I've got it placed on the very bottom now. So now when I look down, I've got this thing mapped on the bottom. I'm looking, basically with my goggles, I'm looking down, and that's what I would see. So, it's pretty great. So yes, you can map 360, but you can also put 360 titles in. So for example, I have a 360 title here. And if you look here, notice what's great about this, I could put this 360 title wherever I want in that 360 space. Whatever reason, let's see here. See, I can move that 360 title up or down, or I can move it to the back of the sphere, literally to the back of the sphere, so that I'm looking around with my, Vision Pro or whatever goggles I'm in, turn around, and there's like text on the backside. So you could put text anywhere. These are titles that were specifically designed for the 360 space. Okay, so it's really great. So the answer to the question is yes, you can put flat content in a 360 world, and then you could keyframe that to keep it centered. But remember, your users are going to have the ability to look around. So even though you pin it there, that doesn't mean they can't look around and look at other stuff. Okay, you can't force the user to like, okay, that's always going to be in front of them. No, you could just think of this as your starting point, your true north. Think of this as true north, but they could still look around. All right, so that's just a little bit of a primer, a little primer on 360, and it's something that we'll probably be talking a lot more about in the near future. So it's kind of good to break out the 360 tools again, Mark.
Yep. I think it's coming up. Hey, would you mind sharing my screen real quick? I want to address the time code thing again, because there's more discussion about it. I think it's good.
There I go. There you go.
Okay,
Oops.
great.
Oh wait, wrong one.
That's
There we
you.
go. There we go.
Great. So in Final Cut, there are two timecode options. In generators elements, there's a timecode generator, which I have sitting right here. And then in the effects browser, there is, in the basics, there's a timecode effect. I have them both over this clip. And so this generator, you can set it to, in the inspector here, you can set it to the project, which will then just match the project timecode. You can see 3906, 3906, or you can set it to source. But with the generator, the source always just means it starts at 1 right here, and then counts forward. Now you can add an offset into it, but not quite as useful in my opinion. However, the timecode effect, you can also set to timecode to project, and you can see the 3818 matches there, or you can set it to source, and the effect timecode there will show you the source timecode, in this case, the clip name as well. So that's a better option. Of course, you have to apply it to each clip. And then Tom Wolski mentioned that you can burn in timecode and compressor, which is a great option. A lot of people forget about compressor, but super useful if you're doing a lot of work in Final Cut. You can just do it all right in compressor.
All right, Mark, thanks for that. So I'm just kind of a quick straw poll here. I mean, how many people are interested in Apple's Vision Pro? I have no idea. It looks very interesting. So that's something. Just curious, straw poll. What do you think? Is it something you might be interested in? What do you think of the price tag? Is it something you'd use? The price tag comes down. It's just interesting. Okay. Any other questions that came up while I was demoing? Looks like. So now's the time to and put in your questions. We're looking at about maybe 15 more minutes of the show. So now would be the time to put in your questions. I'm going to go back to our question list, Mark, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah.
So there was a question about motion, Mark, specifically for you about when using keyframe editor, I'm having problems with the keyframe shifting when I select it. When I select it. It either moves 1 or 2 frames along the timeline or shifts vertically. Do you have any techniques for selecting a keyframe in a way to prevent this undesired jumping?
I do not. I know. Let me first say I feel your pain. I understand what you're talking about. It doesn't happen. It hasn't happened that often for me recently, but occasionally does happen. Especially you're zooming in really tight to keyframes. They seem to be one off of the playhead. The playhead's here, the keyframe's there, and you can't seem to park on the keyframe. And I've just powered through it. It seems to be a little bit of a bug. And by the way, anything that you would like to see as an additional feature in Final Cut Motion, or any bugs that you experience in Final Cut in the help menu, go to the service and support page. And they hit it a little more now. It used to be directly you could provide feedback in the help menu, but now you need to go to the service and support command under the help menu. It'll take you to that web page, scroll down, and then there's a Final Cut feedback. Fill that out. They read that. They definitely read that. So submit your bugs, submit your feature requests, get them in there.
No, actually, your requests go into a box, just like the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark, and it goes into in an Area 51 warehouse until the 1950s. Anyway, a couple of questions that came up while you were talking. I'm going to go back and see. Wild Sea Harris asks, is there a way to have a laser to follow two different trackers? A layer to follow two different trackers. Layer. Yeah. For instance, I have one tracker on an object that leaves out of frame as another one enters. Can I track both one and then the other?
I have a object that leaves out of one frame as another one enters. Well, you can apply, I assume you're talking about Final Cut Pro, and I'm assuming you're talking about the object tracker.
Yeah, I think he is.
And yeah, that's a good question. You're not tracking layers, you're tracking specific objects. That's and right. I would suppose you should, I don't know, actually. I'd have to see. I mean, technically, you should be able to drag two separate elements, like two separate titles, from your browser onto the viewer and track two separate elements. But I think that should work. I mean, I would just test it out and see if it can maintain two tracks, because it has a list of tracks in the inspector where you can have multiple tracks. So I should think that should be possible. I'd have to do a little test, but I think that should be possible. Okay, I'll play with that while Steve answering another question. Although, Steve, can you answer this P Weeks one? Do you see that? It's right above one of a kind's generous contribution there.
See. Yes. Okay. So the question he's asking is, when I copy a camera file from the card to the hard drive, Final Cut Pro grays out the option to leave files in place and have no choice but to import it in the library. Is there a way around this? No, it's not a way around it. Apple did that. Apple's protecting you from yourself. There's protecting all of us from ourselves, because when you have a card in there, and if leave files and paste were an option, that means when you pulled the card out, all your media would be offline. Boom, be gone. Right. So there's two options for this. You copy it into the library like Mark does, or you choose a folder like I do and send the media to a folder outside of Final Cut. Either way,
or third option,
yes,
is you first create a camera archive and import from that.
Yeah, you can create a camera archive, but there's no way to. Yeah, it's just, again, Apple protecting you from yourself.
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
Okay. Is it okay? So there was a question in here toward the bottom. So they say that I look too green and you look too red. That's the bottom line. So we probably could do a little bit more color grading next time. I'm actually shooting with a Blackmagic Pocket 6K, and it's I'm using a Rec 709, the built-in LUT on the camera. I probably could give it a little bit more saturation, but yeah, maybe you are looking a little sunburned there, Mark.
I am a little sunburned. It's accurate. It's accurate.
All right. So Max Rule asks, I haven't used Final Cut for a while. Did Apple ever sort out the workflow to and from Logic? I haven't used that workflow in a while, but it had. I can say that it has improved. You can export an XML and bring your audio rolls into Logic, and it separates them as it puts them into what's called, I believe Logic calls them stacks. So for example, like a roll, a dialogue would be in one stack, and your music would be in another stack, and effects would be in another stack. So it does organize them. It's still, last I checked, it still had a problem with stereo versus mono. Like typically as an audio editors want a stereo file broken out as separate left and right. They don't want it like in a stereo image. So last time I checked, it was still weird when you'd send a stereo file that would come in awkward and wouldn't be right. But the short answer is they've made some improvements but I haven't checked in a while. I haven't done the workflow in a while. The standard still for a lot of people doing Final Cut to editor workflow would be X2 Pro, because a lot of the metadata is retained when using that plugin, but it's kind of a pricey plugin. Yeah.
Hey, Steve,
Yeah.
I tested, and you can absolutely add multiple tracks to multiple elements in the clip. So you can track the same, well, it wouldn't be the exact same object. You have to track separate objects, two separate objects, but you can add as many as you want.
Awesome. All right. That's a great question. Okay. All right. While you're looking at the questions there, I'm gonna just peruse our spreadsheet one more time, looking for. There was a question about the title inspector, Mark. Hey, Mark. No, I said, hey,
Yeah,
Mark.
sorry, I'm looking.
You,
I'm looking
do
for
you,
a. Somebody asked about something, and I know we've got a Mac break on it, so I'm just trying to find it for them.
Do you have a suggestion regarding when it's better to use the title inspector, the text inspector, or the video inspector? For my titles, I tend to publish several parameters when building the titles in Motion. However, I find that the position parameters and values published in Motion show up differently in the Final Cut Pro title inspector. And I find that fine-tuning the position numbers in the title inspector is difficult. Perhaps I should be using the video inspector for fine-tuning the position values. So I'm wondering if you have any preference for strategies when it's best to use one inspector over the other.
Yes, so I'm going to answer that. I just posted in the chat the Mac Break Studio that talks about creating custom. There was a question about can you create an archive without an SD card? And Steve, you did a great Mac Break on custom camera archives. So I just posted a link to that Mac Break in there.
Gosh, that was so years ago.
Yeah, well, it's still accurate, still good.
Yeah,
still good, oldie but goodie. That's one thing people don't realize is there's some stuff out there that we did several years ago that are still completely accurate and really, I mean, sometimes it's like, well, let's just release it new, and people don't watch stuff if it's more than a year old. It's like, it's got to be brand new. Anyway, regarding the inspector, first of all, if I'm publishing from Motion, I usually won't publish parameters that are already available in the text inspector, because they're there, like the font and the color and the drop shadow. That stuff's already available for everybody all the time. Why publish it? The only reason I might is to make it more convenient so people don't have to jump back and forth between the title inspector and the text inspector. I wouldn't use the video. I'd be careful about using the video inspector, because anything you do there to a title will also be applied to the underlying video if the Motion template had the placeholder enabled. And that's maybe gobbledygook to some people, but I would just, like, if you try to do a transform in the video inspector, it's going to transform the underlying clip as well. So I would stay away from the video inspector when you're adjusting titles for the most part, and stick to the text inspector and the title inspector for your published parameters.
Awesome. Excellent. So Daniel Suzuki asks, does Final Cut support 32-bit? Yes, it has since, I want to say 10.4. something. Yeah, absolutely supports 32-bit audio. Okay, good. Is there a Mac break? Is there a Mac break for Timecode? I only see one YouTube video from Tentacle Systems. Well, are you talking about a Mac break for like dealing, like actually having an encoded timecode in your clip that Final Cut can read? I think that's the essence of the question.
I think so. Yeah.
I
don't think so.
Well, it's weird about Final Cut and timecode. I mean, like Resolve will reveal like a timecode track. It'll read, what they call the VITSI track timecode, I believe, and it'll even read audio that's timecode that's embedded in the audio track. Resolve will, you normally hear it as, right? Final Cut won't read embedded timecode in audio, and you can add timecode to your DSLR, not DSLR, your camera, whatever you're using. If I honestly, I wish Apple would, maybe improve some of the ways you can work with different forms of timecode. It'd be a lot easier. But it is what it is. So Harlan asks, once you had a video on how to make a loopable video from a background type movie in Final Cut, i.e. Rolling Clouds, is there still out there? Didn't you? I think you did a loopable video in one of our under 60s, didn't you? Or like a...
I did. I will look for that as well in just a second here. I'm also looking for there's a question about basically how to link parameters in motion. And I'm just getting that rigging and publishing thing here so they can see that. We still have the rigging and publishing, right?
Oh yeah, we do. We actually have two rigging and
There
publishing
it is.
titles. Yeah. So definitely, during the this morning or yesterday, Mark and I were having a discussion about Resolve in Final Cut, and this discussion might interest you. Is that Mark's currently working on a tutorial in Fusion, and Fusion is a built-in compositor effects motion generator built into DaVinci Resolve. And there's things in Fusion that you can do that you just can't do in Motion, but there are things in Motion that you can do much better and much easier than you can in Fusion, right, Mark? So
Sure.
So you want to talk about that a little bit, because I thought it was an excellent point that you made.
It actually made me think about doing a whole MacBreak Studio on sort of Motion versus Fusion, because like Steve says, there's stuff that Fusion is great for, you just can't do in Motion, and very specific to visual effects. The painting with cloning and the tracking blows Motion away. But on the other hand, the motion graphic capability of Motion, especially with text animation and path animation and things like that, and particles, are so much more intuitive and fast and easier to do in Motion than they are in Fusion. So I think if you're a Final Cut user who uses Motion, there's a reason to consider the free version of Resolve just for the painting and tracking capabilities of Fusion, because there's a few things you cannot do in Final Cut and Motion at all that you can do in about 5 minutes in the free version of Resolve. On the other hand, if you're primarily a Resolve user and you're using Fusion, you're turning yourself into knots to do what could be so fast and easy to do in Motion. So I really think no matter which one you focus on, the other one is a great complement. So I'm thinking about just putting something together that explains that, because I use both of those applications in depth, and each of their feature sets and their complementary strengths and weaknesses are very significant and interesting, and useful. They complement each other in a really great way.
Awesome. And speaking of which, someone had asked a question earlier. I think one of the first questions that was posted earlier, and I just fully thought. So NMAC asked this. So we're finally getting to your question, NMAC. I have a question. Learning After Effects for motion graphics, since it fits perfectly with our discussion, can you share with me the workflow between After Effects and Final Cut Pro? There really is no workflow. You work in After Effects, and when you're done, you go to the render queue and you spit out a ProRes file, and then you bring that ProRes file into Final Cut. That's it.
With alpha if you need it.
With an alpha if you need it. That's a good point, because in After Effects you can render out the movie. I believe it's called Alpha Plus. It's been a while since I used After Effects, but yeah, you can choose to render it either way. But yeah, you gotta spit out a movie. So anyway, sorry to take you so long to get it, but that question fit there in our show. Yeah.
I think there is still a tool. I mean, it used to be Automatic Duck. It was Wes did a tool to move between After Effects and Motion. I believe there's still a tool right now. If any of you guys are using it or remember the name, you can post it here in the chat. But it has some limitations. And honestly, I have to use After Effects for some projects. And in that case, I do exactly what Steve just said. You render it out.
Okay, cool.
Couple other great questions here. Do you mind if I jump on a couple of them here?
Jump.
Does it upload Final Cut Live, or do you have to reboot Final Cut when you save the Motion project? P-Weeks, it's all live immediately. As soon as you publish a Motion project to Final Cut, it's available immediately. There's no need to relaunch anything. It's super great. And you can modify any of this built-in Motion content in Final Cut, and that updates right away. You do have to bring a new version into your timeline, but the browser version updates right away. And then DCreative Vision asks, is it possible to import Blender files into Final Cut or Motion? It is not. However, Motion supports 3D files in the USDZ format. We've got a whole tutorial on that. So what you do, and this tutorial covers that, is you export those 3D models from Blender or Cinema 4D or what have you in the USDZ format, and those will import into Motion. And from there, you can publish them to Final Cut Pro. And we have a whole, you check our website, there's a whole tutorial on how to work with those 3D objects.
Okay, cool. A couple of straggler questions from our spreadsheet. Someone asked, I want to edit music demos for promotion. Is there any editing tips or tutorials for training? I don't know. You kind of have a really good answer for that, Mark, when we were talking about, cutting music-driven content for promos and such. That's kind of a big subject, and your style will vary widely depending on the type of music that you're cutting. I mean, I might cut one thing for jazz versus cutting something that's kind of more like progressive rock. And so, Mark, you had a really good suggestion.
Yeah, Steve and I were chatting about this earlier, and our basic opinion is that like it seems to be a question about style, like editing style, and it's not specific to an application. It's sort of like, hey, watch a lot of stuff and find what you like and try to emulate that. And at that point, you might have questions on technique, like how do I do this particular kind of jump cut or speed ramp or what have you. But the thing is to figure out the styles that you like, that you want to emulate, and then just figure out how to make the software get it to do what you want. Now, what it brought up for me is some of you guys might be interested in this. There's a show on Apple TV Plus called Watch the Sound with Mark Ronson, who's a fantastic music producer. It's a series. I think there's 4 episodes. I'm only into 2 of them. Watch the Sound on Apple TV Plus. And it's amazing. It's out for me. Like Steve and I both are musicians. We both play instruments, and we're both relatively new to doing so. And it's just a fantastic series. The first one was about auto-tune, like sort of the pros and cons, but it goes in deep. I mean, he has all these artists on. He has Paul McCartney on there and all these other artists. The second one last night was about sampling. The next one is reverb, and I forget what the last one is, but I recommend, because I think most people who edit, actually, I think there's a lot of overlap between editors and musicians, and it really helps you because you kind of edit to an internal rhythm. And so thought you guys might be interested in checking that out. If you've seen it, post something here, because I'd like to know if you feel the same way about it.
Yeah, Faded Eccentric asks, is there a big learning curve from Final Cut?
Yes.
Kind of, yeah. Two
different.
Yeah.
That's what we're here for.
Yeah, it's really weird because I get people all the time like, I want to go into Resolve. Mark and I both produce Resolve training. We have a 6-hour Resolve course on learning the basics. 6 hours of learning the basics, because you got to look at Resolve as like, each page, the edit, cut, fusion, color, they're all their own applications. It's literally like 6 applications in one app. It's very daunting. So I just say get your feet wet. Start with the edit page.
Cool.
I wouldn't even start with a cut page. The cut page is, you just start in the edit page. That's all I say.
Just do Steve's core training. Your core training is great.
Yeah. And then, like I said, Mark's Fusion tutorial is coming out, and I think that his Fusion tutorial will be really good for everybody if you're a Final Cut, because again, Mark's been saying there's things you can do in Fusion that you just can't do in Motion. And he showed me kind of a preview of the stuff he's going to be demonstrating, and I was like, whoa, I didn't even know you could do that. And with just a handful of nodes, not even a big complex node tree, but just like 3 or 4 nodes, and you could do that. So it's pretty cool. And yeah, I can't wait to get that out for you guys to see it. So One of a Kind's asking, we'd like to see an episode 360 video, specifically compositing a 180 fisheye clip onto a 360 project. That's something that I think Apple's aware of. It's like 180 is also very popular. Canon has this really nice camera that shoots 180. People like that because you get the full panorama, but you don't have to worry about, Uncle Charlie standing behind you, while you're filming, right? So 180, but the problem is that Final Cut does not support 180. It's only 360. So that's something that, it's supported in other apps, but just not in Final Cut. So I'm really hoping that we're going to see some big changes to the entire, what I call immersive workflow in Final Cut. I think if Apple doesn't do it, they're just missing a huge opportunity, especially we're on the the dawn of a new era in AR and VR with their Pro. So cool.
If we didn't answer your question, it's hard to scroll through and find stuff we might have missed. So please just ask it again, so it'll go right to the bottom of the chat there.
Yeah, so we're going to probably wrap up in about 5 minutes or so. So if you have any last questions or anything still burning on your mind, try to do our best to answer as many of the questions. Did we answer that one question about spatial conform? Someone asked about, can you do a default spatial conform method for the project?
Great. Yeah. Let me.
Do you want to share your screen?
Yeah, sure. Share my screen. So the question, just so people know what the question was, they're like, hey, is there any way I can set the spatial conform for clips before bringing them into the timeline? Because each time you bring it in and it's set to fit and you want to change it to fill, et cetera. So I'll show that. By the way, you see on my screen here, if you go up to the window menu, you can show project and source timecode. This is not the same as burning it in, of course, but it's a way you can compare and see what that shows versus the timecode effects. So you can see the 900251 is my source timecode right there. And the 12006 is this. It shows for each clip too. So when this one here actually shows the the source timecode for all stacked clips together. And sometimes people don't realize that's a relatively new thing that Final Cut added in, the ability to show those there. Anyway, let me turn those off. And here's the deal. So I'm going to go to my stills. And here I have a bunch of stills. And let's just say, like, these vertical ones, if I want to put them in a regular project, normally, if I hit E to put it in there, go down to my project, and it doesn't fit the timeline. Actually, I'm already in a vertical timeline. Okay. But you would have to go in here and change the spatial conform from fit to fill. There we go. And it fills the screen. Like, boy, that's a pain in the neck. You could select multiple ones in the timeline, but you don't even need to do that. Watch this. You can select all the clips you want to in the browser and set their spatial conform to fill in advance. And now, once you add those, I'll just hit E to add them all. You can see that they're all set to fill. If I just go over each one, you can see those are already set to fill. So you can basically set them up in the browser first. You can't it'd be nice to have a setting in preferences where you could say, hey, make the default fill, but that doesn't exist. But to me, this is the next best thing, is to go ahead and do it in the browser before getting stuff into the timeline, and you're kind of set to go.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, that's great. All right. Okay, I'm looking. We asked a question earlier about the Vision Pro and how many people are interested in it. It got something that seems like my first reading was too expensive. $3,500 I think was the price tag, and it is very expensive. So I think a lot of developers are probably going to jump on it, and I feel like Apple's going to sell a bunch of them even at $3,500. Honestly.
Yeah, it's a full computer. I mean, it
is. It's got Vision. It's got a Vision OS and everything. Yeah,
it's interesting.
Yeah.
P Weeks is asking, can you have a video clip snapped to the playhead? And not quite sure what it is you want to do, but you can turn on snapping in the timeline and drag a clip, and it will snap to the playhead. If you want to snap an edit point, you can use a keyboard shortcut to do an edit. I'd recommend Steve's core training for Final Cut that will take you through a lot of those basics of just how to do all of those things, the basic editing techniques.
Yeah. Also, David was asking, do we have any legacy training packages for 10.4? And yes, David, just use support at Ripple Training, and we'll get you set up with some of our older training if you're interested. So what we're going to do is we're about ready to wrap up here. I just wanted to point out one more thing, is that we're still running our 72-hour flash sale, $10 per plugin. They're normally $30 each, and that's a great time to get these plugins that Mark and I created. I mentioned this at the start for those of you who joined late. This is a great deal. You get all 9 of them for $79 at 70% off. So check that. It's only going till tomorrow morning. The sale goes off tomorrow at 9 a.m. So we'll look at, you got a little countdown timer here. It tells you how long the sale is going to be. The other thing is, I want to remind everybody, the summit Mark and I are going to be in Cupertino November 6th through 8th, along with a lot of other Final Cut Pro people like YouTubers, creators. It's a great place just for all these Final Cut Pro users to hang out. If you get a chance, you'll definitely want to go to this event. It's a lot of fun, and so you can sign up there right on their webpage, and it's being held. And Apple hosts a session. It's just great. Okay, I'm going back here. All right, so if there's any questions, Mark, I think it's a fun show.
Yeah, it's great. Somebody asked me, am I still using the monogram, which is really funny because I have it sitting right here and my Stream Deck, and I use my Stream Deck for these shows all the time, and I use it to control my lights. The monogram, I keep forgetting. Like when I'm deep into editing, I use it mostly for doing a lot of cutting. I'm not using it for color correcting very much. So I feel like, I got the 3 dials that I don't use those as much, but I use the cutting thing a lot. The buttons makes me a lot faster.
Yeah. Awesome.
We don't know if it's going to be streamed, by the way, the Creative Summit. I don't think it has been in the past. I think it's been available afterwards for like a fee or something.
Yeah, they charge a fee, whatever. But yeah, it's better if you could be there, honestly.
Yeah, please come. Right. We'd really like, if you have never come, please come. We'd love to meet you in person instead of virtually.
All right, so with that, it's we're just wishing everyone a happy weekend. For those of you who are watching, it's already Saturday. Happy Saturday for everyone else in the U.S. Just enjoy your weekend. Here it's like pouring down rain and lightning and thunder. It's typically monsoon season, so I'm going to enjoy that. And wherever you are, have just a great enjoying the last days of summer. And we thank you for, again, your support, liking our channel, watching our videos, buying our plugins, buying our tutorials. We really couldn't do this without you. So thanks for that.
Agreed. You guys are the reason we can do what we do. So we appreciate it. And we really love doing this. So thank you very much. And we'll see you guys soon.
We'll see you.